So welcome everyone to the monthly online Q&A meeting for the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course, the 2-year Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course. I've had one question submitted to me via email, and then we will take some time to go through the questions that you have in the chat box. But the first question deals with techniques. The questioner says, since reading the Yoga Sutras and noticing that no specific techniques are mentioned, it leaves me wondering what the origins of our current techniques are beyond the lineage of Lahiri Mahasaya. How open to interpretation are they? Do all the Kriya lineages fall within a really defined mode of expression, or is there a lot of variation of technique? Okay, so we'll start at the bottom of this question and work our way up. First, I have to say, since I have not been initiated by or really learned from anyone in different lineages than through Roy Eugene Davis, I can't speak completely about what these variations are. I can say that I've heard Mr. Davis talk about people that he's counseled when they've asked him about different kinds of techniques. And they've also learned from other Kriya Yoga teachers. So I've heard some other variations. Also, I've had students and individuals write to me. They said, well, I've learned this technique from so-and-so. It's not part of your lineage, but does this seem appropriate? What are your thoughts? So I've heard from other sources about these things, but never really experienced any other teaching from any other branches of the Kriya Yoga lineage. But what I have noticed is that there is variations oftentimes in the things that are done within the technique. So for example, with the Kriya Pranayama process, it's very straightforward and very basic of pulling the current up through the spine or using your imagination to feel life force or electrical current ascending up through the spine, holding the breath for an instant in the higher brain centers and letting it flow back down. That's the core of the technique. From what I've heard from other people is there are just variations on that. Sometimes you chant certain syllables like the bija mantras at various chakras, or you spend a little time at each chakra as you go up and as you come back down. So there are some variations there. But ultimately, the main thing that needs to be done is assuming that you are healthy, peaceful, you're not menstruating, you're not pregnant, you're not sick, you're not emotionally disturbed, and you're not exhausted, then the key is simply to circulate that life force, withdraw your awareness into the spine, and circulate that life force up through the spine and let it flow back down. That's the key. Many of the other things that are done are really to help you actually get engaged in the process. It's like if your mind is very erratic and jumping around at all these different things, and you tell someone, stare at a tree and clear your mind. Well, they can do that for maybe about 3 seconds, but then the mind, which is very skillful at distraction, comes in and makes up all these different things. But if you can give someone 20 different things to think about all at the same time, their mind doesn't have a chance to think about other things. You've heard me say it before, even in the book Kriya Yoga Vichara, that the more complicated a technique is, the less advanced it is, ultimately. But to get back to answering the question, there are variations in the technique. But the engagement of the technique, the core practice of the technique, is withdrawing your awareness within, pulling your attention to the spine, either through the breath, feeling an ascension of current up through the spine as you inhale, and then feeling that same life force flow back down through the spine as you exhale, or using your imagination to do so. That will pull your awareness within. Now, there's a reason that we recommend, for example, doing alternate nostril breathing before beginning Kriya Pranayama. That's because what alternate nostril breathing does is it balances the life force through the left and right channels of the body. the solar and lunar channels of the body, which essentially are the channels related to duality. The Sushumna, where you're circulating the life force in Kriya Pranayama, is considered to be beyond duality, timeless even. So you practice alternate nostril breathing first to balance the left and right channels, so it's much easier to withdraw your awareness into the central channel. And then by circulating life force through the spine, you are able to more efficiently, if you really do it, meaning you don't just mechanically do it, you give your full attention to it, you're really able to get into a state of pratyahara, or internalization of attention. So then you can focus and then meditate and eventually experience samadhi. So this is the bottom rung of the question that was asked here. Now, what are the origins of these techniques beyond the lineage of Lahiri Mahasaya, and how open to interpretation are they? These are yogic meditation techniques. Because of marketing and because of other people's trying to promote something as special, oftentimes we think that these kinds of practices are specific to one lineage or one group of teachers. But even in other traditions, even in other cultures, there are similar practices which bring awareness to the central channel and those psychic centers that we call chakras and circulate energy through that. So these techniques, they're not specific to Kriya Yoga. There are variations of them in other traditions and even other cultures. And that's because this is part of, in a way, how the natural world functions. Meaning that you might notice, or if you've studied any history, certain cultures often discover similar things at the same time. It's because human consciousness is a whole. Human consciousness is a whole, which means that there are fundamental things that are consistent throughout human consciousness, such as ways to be healthy, ways to have a peaceful mind, ways to evolve spiritually speaking. So the techniques that you have learned either through me or Roy Eugene Davis or possibly Self-Realization Fellowship or other students of Yogananda, there's going to be a core practice there. And as Yogananda and others have described, a lot of this wasn't common knowledge to people until Babaji taught it again to Lahiri Mahasaya. That doesn't mean it didn't exist. It means it wasn't common knowledge. Because the theory goes that before Babaji reintroduced this to Lahiri Mahasaya, we were essentially in a dark age, which means humanity didn't really have the capacity to understand this kind of work. And the majority of humanity now still doesn't have the capacity, but many, 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 many more people do compared to 200, 300, 400 years ago. So it was reintroduced because we moved into an age where it is more easily appreciated, understood. Just like as we move through the ages, we will likely move away from some of these ideas of medicine and healing that we have today into things that we can't even really comprehend. Just like if you go back and study medicine and healing 200, 300, 400 years ago, the things that people thought, you wouldn't use the word inflammation or germs. They wouldn't know what you're talking about. There are these advances. So just like there are these advances in technology, science, and medicine, there are also advances in spiritual understanding, spiritual evolution. And those of you who are in the Holy Science class at the Patreon community, patreon.com/Kriya Yoga, we haven't talked about it yet, but at the very beginning of the Holy Science, Sri Yukteswar discusses the evolution of human consciousness as it relates to the yugas or the great ages. So the origins are essentially in the blueprint of humanity. It's even been said that Lahiri Mahasaya learned all kinds of different techniques from Babaji, but the ones that he shared with certain students, they were appropriate to those students, to their life, to their situation. They're going to revolve around a particular kind of core idea of practices, but techniques can be adjusted based on the student, which is one of the reasons why mass initiations are very good as an introduction. But in order to learn, really learn for you what is necessary, it is helpful to work with a mentor or someone who's had a teacher, been through the experiences, and has developed the capacity to understand what likely is going to work for you based on your own temperament. Even in my own practice, I can think of probably one major and two minor variations of the technique that one day I was sitting there meditating, and it occurred to me, well, let's try it this way. It just popped into my awareness after, a decade or more of doing the exact same kind of technique over and over again. All of a sudden, based on my studies, my understanding of what was going on internally, I thought, well, what if we did it like this? And in my own experience, that became a very powerful technique that I use. It's also a technique that for certain people that have gone through the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program, that I've been able to observe and see how they're progressing, I share those techniques with them. And they've also found them to be useful and helpful. So we have to remember that it's easy for us to say things like, there are these lineages and dogmas and traditions that oftentimes people think are set in stone, when it's evolving, it's growing. Just like before Babaji and Lahiri Mahasaya, there was a particular way that things were done, spiritually speaking. After that, a certain kind of technology, spiritual technology, was realized. And we're just at the very beginning of an age that's come out of the dark age, the Kali Yuga. So it's going to make sense that things are going to continue to blossom and grow for each individual as time moves on. And this is one of the reasons why it is actually so important to have the teacher-student lineage, because while the essence of the teaching is the same, and as pointed out in the question, the essence of the teaching as it's related to the Yoga Sutras, that's the essence of the teaching, but it's not the specifics. It's the overarching guidelines. But those are applicable in different ways to different times. For example, this is one of the reasons why many people really appreciate the approach of self-realization fellowship. Okay, that's wonderful. And I don't have a whole lot to say about that really, because I've never really participated with SRF. I've just heard about it. Because once I met Mr. Davis, I didn't have any sense or desire to explore anything else. I knew that this was appropriate. But Yogananda's teachings were specific to Yogananda's time. They were specific to Yogananda's time. And the reason he had students after him was because they were going to go forward in time, and they were going to participate in a different kind of culture, a different kind of experience. People these days, they're not coming to America in the early 1900s when the Ku Klux Klan had its highest membership ever. We don't have to wander around talking about Jesus and the Christ consciousness, because we can talk directly about yogic principles, because that is where we are in this time and place. Now, it's okay to use those terms because they make sense and they are useful, but the reason we have the teacher-student lineage is specifically because there is a core teaching, a core flame, if you will, being shared through time, and each following student-teacher approach has to speak to the culture, speak to the people of now. Otherwise, it becomes stagnant, old, crusty. It dies out. It doesn't have any more life in it anymore. So the techniques themselves are slightly open to interpretation, depending on who's teaching. But hopefully that person who's teaching has some experience to understand how to interpret them without just letting one's mind get in the way. And that's one of the difficulties and one of the problems with in a sense, trying to guide ourselves. I think it's a beautiful thing, really. But it's very hard when you guide yourself unless you are extremely clear. And if you are, you will know, and you won't be having to ask anyone about it. It's hard to know, well, is this really something I need to try, or is this just my mind trying to pull me away from what I need to be focused on? In my experience interacting with many, many people, most of the time when people say, I've come up with this new idea, new way of doing it, it's because they're bored with their old techniques, or they haven't really learned how to actually engage the techniques. Because the techniques, they're never going to be boring. Even the simplest technique, if you can fully get in there and activate it in a way, or really get in there and sink your attention into it, you're not going to think, I need something more. It's going to be obvious the power behind it. And it all revolves around this idea of bringing the awareness within, practicing pratyahara, and essentially flowing your attention upward into the higher chakras, flowing your attention upward into the higher brain centers. That's why when we meditate together, often in these kinds of settings, the online meetings for the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course, mostly what I do is I just try to guide you within, and then direct your attention through pratyahara upward, inwards and upwards, like a river flowing inwards and upwards. And that is so simple. And if you can really get behind that, really get into that, you won't really need any other techniques. Also, one last thing about this is we always have to remember that when it comes to meditation, no matter what technique you're practicing, no matter what it is the ability to hold your awareness on one thing at the exclusion of all else. That is the ultimate training. Because if you can do that, then you can put your awareness anywhere. Which means if you have a candle flame in front of you, you don't even know the Kriya techniques. But if you can hold your awareness on that candle flame at the exclusion of all else, you're practicing profound meditation because nothing else is coming into play. Which means, let's say you do learn the Kriya techniques. Now it's going to be so easy for you to hold your awareness within and flow it upwards because you've already developed that skill, that capacity to hold your awareness in one place. This is why it's so difficult at times because the mind wants to say, well, we need something else. You know, this isn't quite enough. And the minute the mind starts doing that, you know you're onto something. Because the mind's kicking up dust because it doesn't want you to just focus on one thing. Because when you're focused on one thing, there's not a whole lot to think about. And then the mind loses its purpose and its mission. And that's okay, because it will never lose its purpose and its mission fully. Because you always have a use for the mind relating to the world and so on. But this is a way of, how would I say, this is a way of training the mind to know what its purpose and place is. You know, it's like your mind is a screwdriver, and that screwdriver has a personality, and you need a hammer, and the screwdriver is saying, no, use me. And you don't need a screwdriver, you need a hammer. Or you need a wrench, and here comes the screwdriver again. No, use me. So what we're doing is we train the mind through this is to be able to be appropriate in the moment and it exists utilizing the mind if we need to, or simply being content and patient at other moments.